Just I kind of gave an introduction in the session here about the policy forum and what we're doing over the next year and kind of how we were going to do it. But I think it'd just be good to kind of run through and take any questions that people might have or any suggestions that would be good to go forward. For those, there's a few members who are survivors from the old policy committee. I think Niall, Fraser and Jim, everyone else is unjaded and fresh. Essentially, when I ran as chair just over a year ago, my kind of proposal was that we did a bit of a review of the policy committee, what was its purpose, what was needed, and how we went forward. And as part of that, I kind of met with all the, I think at that point, 28 members of the policy committee. And there was a clear message of being futures focused rather than being focused on the problems now, because there's plenty of organisations, groups and forums that are set up for that. And also a clear desire to do things or at least produce something that's tangible. So the kind of resulting product was the forum, and the idea behind the forum was, as I said to most of you who I've met already, was that we're not here as experts or the people with the knowledge, but we're here as people who will, sound rather painful, but extract knowledge from colleagues around the sector. And I think that's a big difference from where we've been before, whereas we used to co-opt people because we didn't have someone from the environment sector on it or somebody from the youth side. We would co-opt people to fill that gap. And I think people naturally fell into a space where they felt their job was to speak on behalf of the constituents in which their organisation represented. But actually moving to this new model, I think gains a little bit more legitimacy for the group, in terms of our job is to gather evidence, analyse it and turn it into a coherent message that the sector is telling us. So we so very keen, like I said, that we get out the central belt. We hear from organisations that are very small, turning over £10,000 or whatever, compared to all those charities that are turning over millions and holding down national contracts and things like that. And actually trying to bring together one voice for our work. We've got Andrew here, who's a convener of SCVO, and one of the good things about the new forum is it's going to maintain a strong link between the board at SCVO as well. So it may not be Andrew at every meeting, but hopefully we'll be able to get different board members to come through and see what's going on, and they'll be able to feed back to the board and know what's going on there.
Andrew has volunteered to be
our link. Oh well, maybe we will have Andrew here.
It looks like it might be.
Oh, good.
But equally, if you're keen to have a.
No, I think it's really. I think it's. Yeah, no, and I think it's how members of the board feel as well. If people want to come along and hear what's going on or take part in certain sessions, I think we should be open to that, because I think while there was a link previously before SCVO became a SCIO, I think that link with the board and the policy committee was lost for a while. So it's really good to bring it back. So thank you for coming on and volunteering or being nominated to attend the volunteering. Good, I like that. That's perfect. So as I said in the meeting, we're going to take a year-long view. The kind of initial discussions were focused on that manifesto for 2021, which I think is quite a good project for us to get into at the very beginning, because it's very broad. It covers the whole sector. It should give us a real opportunity to get the policy forum concept out there to as many people as possible. So I think that's really positive. The way we've structured the year, I think Shelley's probably already sent out diary invites to most, if not all people. I think we've got. Has anyone not got them? You don't think you have? Okay. Shelley will. We'll cut and I'll do that again. Yeah. So we'll get diary invites into everyone's diaries. But essentially, how we want to structure going forward for the rest of the year is the meetings will take on a kind of evidence session approach. So we'll have all the forum members, and we'll identify various people within the sector or groups of people that we might not know who the person is, but we can work with Shelley and the team to help us identify if we want to find a specific organisation, size, scale, challenges they're facing, etc. And they'll be able to kind of open our eyes to that, and really kind of give them an opportunity and a sounding board to share information with us, which we'll then be able to kind of cobble together and analyse, which will hopefully inform the final product, which will be the manifesto, which we're kind of aiming for about December time to be completed.
There's a date for it in December.
Yeah. So yeah, and so that's kind of the timescale we're working to. So there'll be 4 or 5 formal committee meetings or forum meetings, and we'll have there will be some ad hoc emails, base camp, some desk research, we can some analysis. One of the things we may want to consider is, do we do a short survey to the sector that we can get some responses, and I think we some of that can come out of the conversation we've got going forward. But I think we should kind of be ambitious, and then you know, if we have to pull it back a little bit, we can pare it back. But I'd be keen for us to go as big and bold as possible, and then conscious that we've all got day jobs as well. But you know, see what that looks like. So does anybody have any burning questions other than why am I the only person being filmed right now?
When people haven't been before, like usually we do have like the stand and all the equipment, so it would be everyone. It's not just going to be videos of these.
Yeah.
Obviously, because
Or no one would tune in to watch that.
Also, we haven't really checked if everyone here if they're okay to be filmed yet. So can I just formally check if it's okay to be filmed in future meetings? We can all wear those Guy Fawkes Anonymous masks. And your yellow vest. Yeah.
Andrew, you're going to come.
It's more just a comment quickly, David, if you don't mind, rather question. I mean, I don't want to interject too much because I'm really here to listen, but I just thought you've opened it up with a little bit of history. Just to say, from my perspective, as a still relatively new convener of SCVO, I just started in January last year, so it's just my 13th month as convener. I really welcome the change you've made to the structure. I think it's a really positive step forward, and I'm very keen as convener of the Board of Trustees to try and keep the link as close as possible between the board and the new policy forum. So I'll do my best. I've got the 24th of April in my diary because Shelley sent me it, but I'll do my best to try and get along to everyone myself. But if I can't, then I'll just make sure as best I can that there's another board member present as well. So I welcome it. I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing how the work progresses. And if there's anything you think the board can do to help support the process out with this sort of formal structure, then don't hesitate to shout at me.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go for it.
I know we're going to talk about who we might speak to later, but is the idea that we will speak to a variety of people from the voluntary sector and end up with a sort of big list of what they are concerned about, what they think the government can sort out, and then sort of like marshal it into something more compact, for want of a better way? Or is
that's all right.
Or is the idea that we analyse certain things about Scotland and Scottish society, which should be able to allow us to use the feedback from, at the same time, so we can use the feedback from voluntary organisations to create some sort of vision for the sector? Because, I mean, to try and illustrate what I mean, if we had a big list of voluntary organisation asks, they may not have accounted for things that government will have to account for. And therefore, if we were to ask for them, you look as though you haven't thought about something that you should have thought about. The obvious one is the economy, right? So are we hoping to have a picture of the Scottish economy before us to be able to help us when we're thinking about making that compact version of the manifesto, and other things as well? So, you know, demographic change, stuff like that, or not? I mean, what's the initial thinking, or is... I mean, is this where we do that initial thinking? Yeah,
I mean, I think that's some stuff we can pull out. But I mean, I think any document that doesn't take into consideration the wider environment that the sector's working in and the government is probably a waste of our time and a waste of the sector's time. So I think, and that may be something we want to discuss about. Is there somebody best placed within the forum who can do that little bit of desk research? Or is there places that we can go to and get it already? Does SCVO hold some of that stuff, that they can produce a few papers ahead of meetings. But I think if we just went out to sector and said, tell us the best possible scenario picture, we would end up with something that was incredibly unrealistic, and political parties would look at it and be like, well, yeah, we could deliver that, never. So I think we do need to. I think our job is to take what we're being told and shape it into something that is realistic, but also recognisable by the sector.
So we could have people. I mean, I know you said people could do a bit of desk research, but presumably we could also ask people to come and speak to us who aren't from the knowledge sector.
Yeah, I think we had that conversation at the start about, we could say that we want, someone,
or somebody.
Yeah, or someone from COSLA we can invite to come along. I mean, the question is, do they see it as a place they want to come and engage?
Is that big the muffins there?
Yeah. So, well, it's in the day job, I would say not too big, please. But so yeah, Rochelle.
I just wanted to answer your question because I guess it's quite pivotal to the conversation about SCBO staff support. Yes, we've built it into our plan for the year for most of the people in the team to be working on future of civil society issues. Mm-hmm. You'll have seen the breakdown that Shelley presented in the previous session, which is how we've structured at the moment. And obviously, the kind of where discussions here go is where we'll go with that. Mm-hmm. However, if there are very, very technical things that you need, we can then look at how we might organize that. And also, if there's something which a member of the forum has got very specific expertise in, they may want to volunteer with that support to produce something. So it's not so much about, we will go off and write lots of papers with them, but it's the activity we're doing and that we'll be publishing through SCBO will be guided by where your discussions are going.
I think also, obviously, we need to be aware of the external environment and those factors. But I do think we also need to still have the space to be bold if that is what's coming from the sector. If there is something fairly cohesive coming from the sector which does require a fairly radical change, then I think we need to be able to reflect that as well. So we need to weigh up those external factors to make sure that they don't limit what we can potentially do and say, if that's what's strongly coming from the sector.
Can I just ask one thing on if we draft a manifesto for SCBO, will that be to the board to decide to endorse its content in its entirety and potentially edit it before it has SCBO branding on it?
So I think we had this conversation at the last policy committee meeting, and essentially, the work that we produce will hopefully be no surprise to the board or to SCBO because there's the links there, which is important. And any work will go into SCBO for a review and a kind of rubber stamp, if you would, to make sure. But obviously, if Andrew's here or our board members here to kind of flag up any wild concerns if we're going away the wrong way or anything like that.
Maybe I'm being naively optimistic, but I'm hoping that won't happen. I think if you worked away for 9, 10 months to 11 months and didn't have any interaction with the board, there is a real danger that could transpire. But as David says, because I'm hopefully going to be here mostly and or another, and I need to get into a disciplinary reporting back what's discussed here at the board meeting so that whatever comes out in December is no surprise to the Board of Trustees. Because I think ultimately it has to be signed off by the Board of Trustees, but it's going to be your document, not ours. It will be SCBO's.
Yeah,
and
I think the important part of that is that once we produce the work, we're not all going to sit on the table and come up with a public affairs plan to go and deliver it. It'll be handed over to SCBO to use as they in their kind of work plan as they go forward. So
what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why there's an important link there in terms of making sure it's agreeable with the board and the team at SCBO as well.
Just picking up on the other point, I think it would be quite clear what the manifesto is. Is it aspirations for what SCBO want, or is it what realistically we might actually get into party manifestos and therefore actually into policy? Maybe it's a bit of both, but we need to be clear it is a bit of both.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably come on to that in the next week. I think there's quite a substantial bit there today to kind of chat through what the project looks like as we go forward. Is there anything else at the minute? No? Cool. I'm breaking my promises, Chair. I'm behind time. But I'll catch up. So I think Shelley had emailed everyone out about a vice chair. I don't think there's been any nominations so far, but it has been quite a short turnaround time, so that's perfectly fine. What we have proposed is that we will do it electronically. For those that may not be aware, the terms of reference of the forum has stated that we should have a male and female occupying the chair or vice chair. So there's a 50-50 gender split there. There's no pressure on females around the table to put their names forward. But and if nobody does, we for this year we'll take the people who do put their name forward, and we'll have a general election. But it would be well, general election's probably not the right word to use this time. But yeah, it would be great if we were able to fulfil that. But respect it puts a lot of pressure on slightly less than half the forum at the minute. So please do consider that. Shelley can probably fire something through on Basecamp, and we can have a vice chair in place for when we come to the next meeting in April. Perfect. Yeah.
Can I just check one thing then, given that if anybody reads the description that Shelley sent out, thinks, oh, I can't do that. Is there somebody they could talk to about what support might be available to maybe, if they want to, just to maybe make it the mother? That'd be Shelley, just to talk to them.
In the wider term of reference, I should have included that at the end of the base camp. There is something that says exactly that, like if any of the the treaties could be a problem, we can just get in touch and share good help.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just to say, if there was a bit in that terms of reference where there's a bit of a conversation between the chair and the vice chair as well as how you might want to devolve some responsibilities to the vice chair. So that should also be, I think, part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think in the first instance, I think if you contact Shelley, and then I'm more than happy to chat to anyone as well. So that's fine. Cool. So we just had the session here at the gathering. It was very fast paced. Hopefully you guys were okay catching all those notes. We could probably count how many times funding came up between us all, but we'll lose count eventually. So I thought it would just be good. We've got half an hour here to kind of have a think about what some of the themes that came up. Was there will be recurring themes that may help us start to frame how we structure going forward, which we'll look at in the next session. So it's really a kind of open floor, and feel free to kind of pitch in with any observations or any key points that people came up with. So does anybody want to?
Well, I'll go first.
Go again.
I was struck by how not new the issues were. I mean, I worked on the SCBO manifesto back in 2000, and God knows, whenever it is. It's a long time ago anyway. Well, the first one, when it was a big fat newspaper type thing. And a lot of the issues that were in that, some of the issues that came up today were there. And I think that's partly that's because of the way that the sector is, that some of the issues it faces are almost certainly going to be perennial, and the sector may not like that, but they're the kind of things that get on people's nerves, but they're not really ever going to change because there's conflict between. So, for example, the sector wants permanence, but it also wants independence, things like that. So it doesn't want government to tell it what to do for 20 years. It just wants government money for 20 years. So I mean, I'm being facetious for the sake of effect, but you know what I mean. So although there were some good ideas, there were some interesting different ideas, and one thing I thought was particularly interesting was somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we could get our salary structure sorted out, so we didn't all have to dot around of wildly different levels for doing jobs at different response. So you go from chief executive on 21,000 to junior policy officer on 28,000 because you're working for a big charity instead of a little one. So there are things in there that we might seem a bit more out of the ordinary, but I wonder whether what we should be thinking about in terms of manifesto is this question of what's visionary and what's actually likely to be done by politicians as elected to Holyrood. Because in a sense, a manifesto that doesn't ask a politician to do something that they can do, or that they're even slightly likely to do, isn't going to gain any traction, no matter how nice it would be if the things it asks for actually happened. So that's not about sort of setting your sights low in terms of realism, but it is about being realistic and therefore thinking hard about what ends up in the final version, because if you don't do that, then you just won't get what you want, and you won't get half of what you want. So that was my reflection on that. And also people didn't seem to be as angry as they used to be. I don't know whether that's a sign of, maybe they're just exhausted, but my table was fairly sanguine about things.
One thing that my table discussed was actually challenging defining what we mean by the third sector. Obviously, there is such a large range of organisations, very small ones to very large ones, and so if we are going to work with the third sector, we need a kind of clear definition of who we're targeting, who belongs to it, what it does. If we get that in place, like initially, I think that will form a work. Going forward, that's maybe not something I'd actually really thought of, but what do we mean by third sector organisations?
I think something that came through in the table I was at that I thought was quite interesting was that feeling that we need to get away from distinctions between private, public and third sectors, and that a starting point should be what does society need, to then sort of start from that basis and then on to what is the contribution the third sector makes to delivering what's needed, and then that wider idea of partnerships with private sector and the public sector, and how that's a bigger sort of societal challenge that we are a vehicle to solve. So that was quite an interesting perspective that came through some of that discussion.
So I suppose kind of linked to that, one of the ones was at our table was someone talking about being made less complacency about citizen involvement. So they said, you know, we're really happy that 40% of whatever is volunteer. That means 60% don't volunteer. So we're always focusing on what we think is quite a good figure rather than saying, well, you know, wider. This isn't actually so good, and we shouldn't just kind of rest on our laurels with this and think this is good enough. We should be seeing how we can expand that further. And I think they kind of link that into an increase in charity trust and how we get more transparency in charities as well. I don't know, that's certainly, you know, from my experience, medium-sized UK charity, there's certainly an element of that from the community that we work with that sometimes I think, or you're only doing things for London, or you know your funding's going here, there, and elsewhere, and that can be difficult when that kind of idea gets out there. I'm sure you have seen the same sort of issues as well. So there is an idea that those things are all kind of linked. Charity trust, which obviously SCBO have looked at, and some of that complacency.
Think of the funding. I mean, it's the first thing people said. They then moved on, but it has to be something talking about. Maybe it's not going to change, but it's the idea that multi-year funding and some kind of rolling program of funding, so you don't get to 31st of March each year wondering whether you're going to have to serve redundancy notices. There's no way to run a sector. And I think there was a lack of recognition of what that meant for people, and I think that also reflected in people's career paths. Deciding whether to stay in the sector, whether there's progression, that kind of thing. What's happening tied to it?
One that came up in our discussions about how you encourage people to come into the sector in the first place, as well as keeping them in there as being less paid and everything else, that they're doing a similar job in a different sector. So that was something that came up. But recognising that people had quite a strong motivation to be in it because of the work that people were involved in. Different things that would relate to them. The other thing that came up that I found quite interesting was discussion about encouraging the move on the working week to being less hours as a way to encourage other people to volunteer in the sector. So while I think discussions in the third sector have been about changing the working week to benefit people who work in the third sector, actually we changed people working less hours, they got more time to volunteer, and they more likely to volunteer. So the full-time hours decreased to 4.5 days. That gives them half a day potentially to share their skills with a charity.
I think in the same table there was a wee bit of a discussion around how the kind of the ideas about giving balance of care or working more closely with charities and embedding them more in terms of service delivery is still very much the sector pushing at the door rather than being invited in, and that sense that we still need to see that that good intention realised by the government and by the local authority.
I'm trying to catch up with.
I think there's some really fundamental questions that we'll probably have to struggle with. There's some really good examples of the areas we can go. I mean, one of the things that I noted down just from the feedback, which I thought was really interesting, was your point about Back to the Future and the compact, and how what might the manifesto be seen at, so there's the two arguments of you have the old style manifesto of a 10-point plan, like do this, do that, which never really does anything. Or do we have a bigger visionary manifesto that talks about, pulls a lot of these issues in, but talks about a different relationship or a better relationship with government? And how do we, rather than, because I think if we really just went down a 10-point plan, we'd have funding, and then a few things at the bottom. And how do we reconcile what a major charity wants compared to what a really small charity wants? And how do you come with that? And I thought that Back to the Future state, it was almost like that's the title of it already. We don't need to have a meeting about what do we call this thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what other people's thoughts were on it.
I just wanted to feed in some intel, both on the Basecamp forums, but also in the survey that we reported on and published the findings of yesterday, and also some broader conversations. There seems to be a lot of interest from people in the value of the sector. Mm-hmm. What is the value of the sector? So that kind of builds on some of the impact conversations. But I think it speaks quite well to a manifesto as well, because there seems to be an interest in being able to talk about what the value is of our sector to others, to society, to government.
Do you mean the cash value or the sort of moral, philosophical
Well, this is where it gets interesting, because originally we would have been talking about the cash value, staff, income, assets, but what I seem to be picking up kind of builds on what the Julia Unwin Commission looked at as well, which is the value of the sector in terms of fostering relationships between people and between people in their communities, all that kind of social capital type stuff. And I think that's really interesting, because that is something which, whenever we've had these kind of conversations about what is the sector about, it's those kind of things that people talk about, and those are the kind of examples that people give. So I just thought I'd throw that in. It came out as third after funding, as one of the most important challenges that people were responding to in our surveys. So it's something that's coming out of the evidence.
It came off at our table as well about recognition of the sector and exactly that, what is the impact? And I think it feeds into what you were saying about we're always at the door, the government says that we're the golden thread weaving through the whole thing, but what does that actually mean? And we don't just want to be a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. It needs to be more than that. And I think the impact of what we're doing on the coal face, I guess, really makes that real. But how do we do that when it's so diverse? Because what we're delivering is impact is going to be different.
I think it's kind of, actually, you mentioned it at the table when we were discussing it, that notion of charities, the fundamental point of a charity being to make it sort of redundant sort of thing, and actually no, it's about, there is that value of a sustainable organisation that is able to continue to deliver that because it has a way of meeting and addressing not just the needs, but fundamental values that the service users and that people actually respect. I think that it's quite kind of idealistic, but it works.
I mean, I think that Jennifer's point about what is the sector is, that all that hangs underneath there. We can, if you see the sector as X amount of charities with X amount of capital, with X amount of investment, it just becomes a very structured, boring grey boxes. But when you start hanging things like what is the value, what does it bring to Scottish society, what does it do, what does it change, and that's where I think the challenge lies in how visionary you want to be compared to how bullet pointish to get into manifesto. Is this a manifesto you want people to say, I can read this and I could see a relationship like this existing, or we're going to take point 1, 3, 4 and they're going to take point 6 and 7 and do it like that. and make, I don't know, is there an argument that there needs to be a new compact? Does there need to be a new agreement between?
Well, sorry, I know you're not
No,
asking me.
I'm not.
just look-
I'm looking at you and I'm just saying this. Sorry.
I guess, I mean, hey, you can feed in on this one, maybe, but I suspect what my experience of politicians is what they want is a series of practical steps they can take that if they take them, an outcome will result. That if they don't take the steps, they won't get to. But the steps are easier to understand than the outcome. So it's like, if I follow this recipe, I will get a cake. I have no idea how you get to the cake without the recipe. If you just ask me for a cake, I can't give you a cake. But if you give me the recipe, I can make the cake. See what I mean? So I don't think it's one or the other in that sense, because the truth is, if you say, if you say something like, we want a clearer, more supportive, encouraging relationship with government, and government say something like, we will encourage this relationship in their manifesto, the parties, and then when you get down to it, say, what do you want us to do? And they go, I don't know, push COSLA around a bit more, and then they go, well, maybe not. So it's, whereas if you say, let's take health and social care as an example, I know that's not working perfectly, but if you say, your vision is to have a different kind of service in as part of the health mix. That service is typically, if not always, delivered by third sector organisations. In order for planners to have that service in their minds when they are planning, you need to make sure the third sector is round the table with those individuals in health and social care IGBs, right? So the step we want you to take is force the third sector into that space, whatever health and local authorities want, okay? That's the concrete ask, which has at least in part been done. And the hope then is that you'll see those changes in the service. Now, you can argue about further steps that government might take about who has what power and all that kind of thing. But I suppose what I'm trying to illustrate is there's a practical, concrete step that they can say to civil service, write this out like this, and it will have this. And then they say, and then we'll get this other thing happening, So I think if you have the steps without the vision, or the vision without the steps, you're on a hide to nothing. You have to have a mixture of both. And the risk then is you end up straying into two specific areas, like, this is a manifesto for the third sector, it's all about bloody education, or whatever it might be. But I think there are some steps that we should be identifying. I mean, an easy example would be, if you want the third sector to make strategic decisions about helping both government with its agenda or the country more widely, we need 5-year funding as a minimum, because otherwise people leave, people don't stay, we can't plan all that, we can't bring in match funding because they're like, what, 1 year, we're not doing, you know what I mean? So although that's perhaps something that's been asked for many, many times, longer term funding, and I'm not saying we must ask for that. What I'm saying is that's the kind of thing I mean, that it's these building blocks towards the vision that, for us, our vision, but also hopefully a vision that any government could share. Because what we also don't want to do is produce a manifesto that one party who might win says, well, I'm not doing any of that, because it's against something so much against something they consider to be a priority that they can't control it. So that's what.
That was like something we discussed at our table, was like the importance of like cross-party commitments to the government. They're only in power for 3-4 years. They want something that can be delivered within your tenure of government. Otherwise, I'm not interested. It's going to happen 10 years down the line. They might not be in government. So around focusing on things that can perhaps get the cross-party support, so that regardless of who is in government, that action could be taken forward, even if, as if the government make a commitment now, in 10 years' time, it could still be delivered, even though it might be a different government, because it's like that. It's a good thing that parties would support and not bring things to a certain party, like political parties, Latin char, of the moment.
This might be straying a bit off the chart. I don't know what the phrase I was trying to say there is, but there'll be local government elections a year after Scottish elections, and should we be ambitious enough to produce something that can speak to both rather than just speak to one? I mean, if we can get SNP, Labour, whoever to sign up to it and let it filter through to local authority, like, because funding is coming down to local authority for most people, right? That's where the argument lies.
Also, there's a lot of national policy that impacts on the local.
Has been delivered.
Being delivered, yeah.
I mean, national manifestos and local manifestos might differ slightly, but they tend to work from the main document because that's where they put the time in.
Yeah.
And they're much more closely aligned than they used to be. They're much more closely aligned than they used to be. There's pure renegade things. So yeah, I think it would be helpful, even if we think about them together, even if they're presented together, if we think about them together, so there's some cut and paste asks that other people can use in the next
that was completely by the by. Just when you were chatting, I was like, that's a good idea.
I think what we're straying into there, which is really good, is about how we present this information which we're gathering. And from what you're saying is a kind of logic model approach that you would take to it, and this gets around the issue which policymakers often have with the third sector in terms of how you evidence and change. So if we can take that approach and have that top level outcome with your objectives and your activities sitting below that, then that kind of gets us around some of those big issues, and that we could even take it where we have this approach to the 2021 elections, and then when it comes to council elections next year, we can be going, right, you've got a green for that, you've got a red for that, you know, and start holding to an account on it. So it means we also have some level of measurement on the activities which we actually want to go at.
So you were chatting about building blocks, and I just wrote down what are the building blocks, and I've only got funding. Got time. From what we heard today, is there any? So I think what the next part of the agenda that we move into is planning the evidence gathering sessions, and I think if we're going to take a logic approach to producing it, then we should theme or attempt to theme them. I mean, from today's conversations, do we have some clear themes come out there? Do people feel that there was an obvious theme that was raised?
Would it be useful for us all to put together our notes on it?
Yeah.
And send them to Shelley to analyse, and just see if there are certain ones which are coming in that we can kind of group ask through.
Yeah. I mean, does anybody have any burning things at the minute that we?
I do think we need something in about workforce.
Yes.
So whether that's resourcing, how you encourage people in, how you take people, and I suppose the question is for us, realistic, what can we do? Because part of that's about chatting to governments in terms of what they are doing and prioritising keeping their staff, but what is it that we expect government to do to make the sector more attractive to work in? It's what to keep people there. We just like that back to funding.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is linked to funding because the year or 2 year funding can only offer temp contracts and people move on. The expertise and knowledge they have as well.
Again, it comes back to the recognition as well, recognition of the skills that are within the sector and the fact that that could be lost if there isn't a sustainable funding model.
I guess when we're targeting government as well, we face that challenge. There's civil servants move around like so much as well. If they go from one to like talk to somebody 1 month, then the next month in another department, 6 months later in another department. So that kind of level, it's a challenge when we're reaching out to them as well.
I think related to the recognition thing at the table I was at was a feeling that people didn't feel there was support, or if there was support, it wasn't consistent and varied around the country. There was policies, but not necessarily related to some of that affected them. So I think there's something on clarifying what support is there and maybe standardising to some extent, or something that's a level of quality anyway.
Yeah, I think it was your guys' table I was at when they were talking about, or maybe it was somebody else's now, but they were talking about you get measured. It was actually your one, I think. You get measured against one thing from one fund, and you get measured on one thing from another. And then I suspect local government and national government the same, that they're one will expect you to put 400 people through your service, but the other one will be looking at what outcomes actually happen rather than just the number of people. And if that's the world you're living in terms of just people through a service, then it's not a great measurement. I don't know how you package that into a building block of, what are you asking for then, some sort of standardised assessment.
Well, one of the things you can do, we could think about doing is, I've done this before in manifestos, where it's an ask and an offer. So an ask and a reciprocal offer. So if you will, we will, kind of thing. So that in terms of workforce, for example, I know in the past there's been work from within the voluntary sector about how to encourage stability in the workforce, has to encourage skills development in the workforce, things like that. I'm not au fait with where that's at or who might be involved in that at the moment. But if there are things that the voluntary sector is already collectively doing that will benefit itself, but will therefore benefit its beneficiaries, one approach to a manifesto is to note that offer, and then you have corresponding asks. So so you're expressing your value to government at the same time as asking for something, so they don't just think you're just asking. It's like, if I get a nice Christmas present, I'll do the washing up, sort of thing. So that kind of thing. And the other thing, which is possibly a bit radical, some just popped into my head, but I don't expect people to want to do this, but it is possible we could just go, you know what, bin everything else, funding. There's a manifesto about funding, and here are the points about funding. And if you don't get this right, nothing else matters, because if we can't afford to function, nothing else is going to happen.
We'd probably all get carried in golden thrones at the gathering next year if it was like that. There'd be effigies of us all over the place.
What is it?
In terms of demonstrating value sector, one thing that was discussed at the Lions Act was, in the context of public sector cuts, the voluntary sector is increasingly picking up the pieces and around federal services and stuff. Perhaps if there's some way of capturing like data information around exactly where the voluntary sector is providing service that was perhaps previously provided by a local authority or like a government funded service, and to show to demonstrate as a number, and also in terms of personal impact case studies, the actual contribution that the voluntary sector is making, that the government is recognising well without all of this. We would be, say, £1 million, I don't know, I'm just picking this figure in my head, but like that's like £1 million contribution that the voluntary sector has made because of the funding cuts that we can no longer sustain.
I mean, it's serious, but agreeing with Andrew there. I mean, could we? I mean, if we were to pin it all, I mean, I don't think we will pin it all on funding, but if we were to take that as an overarching part of it, I mean, you could do some pretty good negative case study work, like your table was chatting about, Kate, around the impact of the cuts that are happening if a third sector organisation wasn't present in an area. This is what it looks. I mean, maybe it's time we stop saying how great we are and just say this is how bad it would be if there was nobody here. Yeah.
That was at our table as well. People said, we always, when we're asked to say what we do, we've got case studies that show it in the glowing light. But in fact, maybe somebody's going to say, well, this hasn't worked because, and a lot of the slack has been taken up by third sector bodies, people doing more for less. And you can only do that so far.
Yeah.
I mean, it could work as a unifying theme. I'm just thinking what we need to do in terms of that idea that you just talked about there is make sure you don't that what you want is a message about innovation, creativity in difficult times. What you don't want is a message that says, well, local authorities have had all their money chopped off, so but it's all right, we've taken care of it. So why not keep chopping their money off and keep giving us crappy grants because it's all going. I know you weren't saying that, yeah, but I'm saying that you have to be quite careful with that messaging. But I certainly think you could do a what if, this is a situation negative, and then what if this happened, what if that happened, and you could include the positive one as part of that.
Just a reality check here.
glad somebody's providing that. I feel like Andrew's holding back from
funding is a really big issue for the middle bit of the sector, not the top bit, like BHF, because they get money from donations, and not for the bottom bit because they care more about meeting room spaces and support from all that kind of stuff, not monetary support. So just be really careful that if you make it all about funding, I'm not arguing against it, but it's a very specific part of the sector. The middle bit tends to do things like
might disagree with you. In terms of,
sorry, I'm just going on what we picked up in our survey.
I'm even thinking about high services, bank and they're losing their money and sustain them.
I would class them as middle size organizations. Because we're just by going by income size.
In respect, once you take into account income, the whole sector, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah,
like, so 60-70% of the sector is like self-help groups, peer support, all that kind of stuff.
So they're groups that aren't necessarily seeking
volunteer-led
funding.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
okay.
But they need somewhere to meet that kind of stuff. You've got a middle layer, which is your food banks, which is your training organizations, which is your cycling initiatives, all that kind of stuff, and arts and some sports and that kind of thing. And they are cash starved. Yes, it's a huge issue for them. And then you've got your larger organizations who get a lot of the money from donations or maybe from contracts. Now it's a bit of a mixed picture for them. So I'm just kind of like, just want to put that on the table. So
I think when we speak about funding, we're not talking about resourcing in a slightly wider sense.
Yes.
It's not just always about money. Sometimes it's about people and about how we're forced to treat our people because of other pressures that are on us. So it's a kind of how we provide what we provide, and it takes a big group of resources to do that, one of which is money. And we show our flexibility in the fact that sometimes we can do it with not much, and but there comes a point when that will impact on other resources in the pile. Because actually, one of the things that we need to be mindful of is volunteering is a great thing, but it's not great if you're having to pull people in to do what should be paid jobs for free.
And there's another example which backs up what you're saying, which is when a local authority where it takes money away from funding a community centre or some other funded stopped resourcing a community centre, that has knock-on impacts to a lot of smaller grassroots groups which don't actually want money, but they need a place where they can go and use as a meeting space.
Yeah.
So it's an indirect impact.
True. I think that's quite a good way to frame it in terms of resources rather than just pounds. Really, is quite good. Frank.
I think it's making the funding argument in a more sophisticated way. Pretends, as someone once called it, magic money tree. It's not really what we're talking about here. I think it's more demonstrating, as others have said, the impact of the work of the public sector and sort of making a case for a shift in spend. But if more is invested in public sector services such as X, Y, and Z, then you're going to reduce the requirement of local authorities to spend on crisis services and so on. Yeah, I think it's in fact around 20 so it's sort of dropped in some ways, but I think it's you can absolutely make the case for funding and whether we get carried in shoulder high to the but I think make that argument in that sort of sustainable, realistic way that we're not saying, find millions and millions of pounds in the back of the sofa for us. We're saying rethinking the way the public sector spends its money with a greater investment in sector services that we can demonstrate the value and impact of is the strongest argument to make the funding argument within a realistic recognition that we're not expecting extra money to come flying towards the sector in the next decade. Yeah. So I think we can absolutely make a case for funding, which probably meets that demand from within the sector, while also being realistic. This is something that Scottish Government and local councils could realistically do with a change in their approach.
But that speaks very much to what came out at our table, that there is this idea of public sector having vested interests. You want to be protectionist of their own services before they start doing anything else. Like there's not an incentive for them to go and have those conversations because ultimately they're trying to protect the service. Like there's a lot of self-preservation going on. So someone had said, the Scottish Government needs to be more assertive about where a lot of those cuts are being made as well. So just now what we are seeing is a lot of third sector cuts from the integration board and local partnerships, happening at that level, whereas there was a sense that from the top down it should be saying, like, no, you can't just take that approach, you can't just protect your own services. So maybe that ties into it some way as well.
And just to also add to that, so everybody's aware, I mean, it's worth, we'll send information on this. The sector's income is around 5.8 billion, and around 20 to 22% of that comes from local government funding. So just so everybody, it's just contextualizing it all. It's a very important slice of resources that comes to the sector, but it is, you need to look at that in context.
And is that a little bit spread across a lot of organisations or whole organisations? I mean, if that was to go, would everybody take a hit, or would a whole bunch of organisations just fold?
Well, that's the point I made earlier, that there's lots of knock-on impacts.
Right.
So that kind of money will fund stuff which supports other organisations.
Can that figure be broken down more though? Because was it 5.8 billion?
Yeah.
So does that include, for example, universities?
No.
And
this is third sector.
So even charities like mine and Dave's and stuff like that, would that be included within that?
Yeah.
So
Not the London figures, but the Scottish ones.
Just if there might be, as I just said before, about those kind of middle-sized charities, large charities, smaller charities. Like, for example, our charity doesn't get any local authority funding because we're primarily donations and like legacy funding. So there's presumably a huge cohort which are more or less solely reliant on that local government funding.
Sorry, I won't go into too much detail. It's slightly more complicated than that because, like, for example, BHF and MS Society and others, which are UK-wide organisations, they report their income through, at the UK level, and that won't be counted in the 5.8 billion. But those that have got a Scottish separate branch, which has its own separate Scottish accounts, that would be included.
So looking at sort of some of the issues at a local level with funding, the way funding is granted to local charities and third sector organisations through procurement. So if we're going to be looking at this in some detail, it's changes in procurement practices and the expectations, so that some of like Inclusion Scotland members have had their funding removed because they've been asked to go in competition with national organisations where they're a local disabled people's organisation. Others have faced a change in their what was formerly known as service level agreements, so what their outcomes would be, whereby they're delivering quality outcomes of local authority rather than doing the bread and butter membership work that they previously did, or engaging members with the local authority on decision making. So it's a change in what funding is being used for, or folding organisations. Lots of advocacy organisations facing this at the moment.
That's I think one of the things we hesitate to say the B word, but you know, there will be changes to what can be changed as a result of Brexit. And it may be that there are things that, like procurement, that we have previously been unable to do anything about because they're European, which at least in theory are now national issues, you know, or will be national issues. And I don't know how that will pan out, but it's something we shouldn't be ignorant of, you know, because if we're saying in a manifesto we would like this, it may now be possible that we can have this, whatever it is, because of the different structures that now control that area. So, I mean, although it's a bit of tortuous, then it's something we should consider briefing ourselves about.
Who had an hour and 10 minutes before Brexit was mentioned in the suite. Because I think there's a lot for us to digest there. I think Niall's point about notes fired, I don't know if the best way is to pop them on Basecamp or just like
embrace that modern stuff.
Yeah, embrace it if you can. Just bullet points, themes, key points that came up. I think we'll probably see quite a bit of commonality coming out of that. I mean, in terms of the next meeting is the 24th of April. It's tabled as an evidence session format. So suppose we've got kind of 20 minutes to think about or think through who or what, or you know what we're going to talk about. Who do we want to meet with? Who would be a good group of people to have around the table as our first kind of blue sky thinking session, if you want to use really terrible civil service language. You could tell I worked in government at one point. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts, individuals, organisations, external organisations.
So I kind of imagined when I put in the end of the sessions that I could be on, that the sessions would be themed based on some of the themes that were decided today to pursue as through the manifesto. And it seems like the only thing that we've definitely decided to pursue today is funding. So should the focus of the next session be on funding, just to help guide what we should be inviting? Because otherwise it could be just anyone, and there's no, or could be all over the place, but nonsensical. We need one thing to cover session. So we're thinking, it sounds like it's been agreed that we're definitely doing funding. So shouldn't that include funding and shall that go to us now?
Sorry.
I was going to suggest that maybe it was the first one, if we had more sort of what's the future of work going to look like, what's the future of the Scottish economy going to look like, the answers that we're giving is that sort of context. If we start with funding, then we still have to get all of that. What will Scotland look like in the next 10 years? Might be useful for us to have that as a perspective from which we start our work. Well, that's part of it. So I think anything like that, you really knows what Scotland looks like the next 10 years. But if we had sort of informed witnesses giving us economic analysis, census analysis, population analysis, what's the country going to look like in the next 10 years, and might give us that context from which we start our work, that this is what Scotland looks like, which hopefully gets us to a document at the end of the process, which is speaking to what future Scottish governments will have to address, and how the public sector will have fixed to deal with that. So as the mental Fraser Valland at the start, and people like that, or do a bit of research with academics or think tanks or organisations that have already done a bit of work on that sort of future gazing.
I think that's a good idea. It gives us that backdrop of the, because if they say, we're going to run out of money in 18 months, there's no point asking the funders how are they going to spend the money they won't have. I think that's a good idea.
There is a group of people who have been doing quite a lot of thinking recently, over the last year, taking lots of evidence and chewing over stuff. Young people. It was the year of the young people last year. Right. And so they're pretty well organised, and they're all kind of like, the conversation is going around their head, and also they're coming out with a quite interesting different perspective. There's something which the Brexit secretary picked up today as well.
We did.
So I'm just putting on the table, but I could quite easily organise for a delegation of young people who've been thinking through these kind of issues to speak with the words for if you're up for it.
Is that by the Parliament, or is it the whole bunch of?
There's a number of different arenas. One was the children and Brexit, children and young people's panel. You've obviously seen all the climate change stuff last week. There's a lot of interest and activity. There's a young person's thing that Young Scot organises. So yeah, there are things available.
Are we going to open it wider for people to self-nominate themselves to come along to these things? Because I'm just conscious that we could sit around the table and say these are the best people to come. Are we missing those people that don't shout the loudest? Yeah. Like, how are we going to make this really accessible for people to get engaged with? And I know that might make it more difficult to.
No, I think it's a really valid question.
I wonder if there's even whether we should be opening just now a kind of written evidence sort of thing for the next month, and from there we'll have a better. There's obviously just now we're just working on the basis of what we heard from the people that attended that room. So if you opened it for a brief period of written evidence, which set the kind of parameters of what we want to talk about, things like we know things like funding will come up, so maybe that's something that we look at to happen before we have that first meeting, to then start to decide what we're actually going to discuss at the meetings and some of those key themes, and there'd be a bit of analysis needed around those.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think I'd kind of alluded to it earlier over here around, do we do some sort of online consultation sort of thing? I know SCV have got, EUSA got a software for asking questions, and it's supposed to be how easy it is to push out through various channels, because there's a risk that we end up just hearing from the same people anyway.
Yeah. And even just using those same questions we did today, I thought that worked quite well. So
yeah, I think we only need 2 or 3 questions to just get people to throw stuff down on paper.
Really accessible questions as well, so you wouldn't feel like you would have to create to respond to it. And certainly for accessing young people, those are questions that
My only plea is
I know it could be a lot.
No, not that. My plea is, don't make it a one-way process. Because a lot of consultations that people get are like, throw this stuff into a black hole and they never hear anything back. We've got the technology now at SCBO to make it a 2-way interactive process. So my suggestion is, let's use that. I mean, I strongly suggest let me and Shelley and David have a chat about some of the resources that SCBO can bring in to support you on this. There's a whole bunch of stuff from Google Docs and to everything else where people can actually contribute and react at the same time. So it's a to and fro, and they feel so they're getting something at the same time as giving. And also they can see how your deliberations and papers are developing rather than waiting 12 months before they see anything. We can do that now. We've got the technology to do it. So, with your permission, I'd be up for me and Shelley maybe having a chat with.
So yeah, I think that would be good, and I think it's something we should look at doing. My concern would be that we get the same old people engaging in that method. I think there is something to be said for sort of just a kind of quick, short, 3 questions, throw your ideas down and share it. And we'll probably find some people that have got some really good ideas that we just weren't aware of, and we can invite them to participate in those things. My concern would be that you just end up with a whole bunch of policy people who all come from that middle or top end.
Well, that's what I mean. I think we have now started to crack that problem. So with a bit of faith in us,
well, let's have a chat about it.
But I'm just thinking that kind of thing. We can talk around this table a lot, but maybe it's worth just kind of getting the conversation going, putting it on the base camp and getting that.
And I've got no problem at all with a incredibly rough first draft appearing somewhere, and people can go back and forward, and as a font it, we can go and watch it develop and engage with it. I've got no issue with that as long as it's able to be resourced and we can learn stuff from it and add on to it. I'm totally fine with that.
The other thing is, you might go down a particular direction with this stuff if you just kind of absorb stuff from others before putting stuff back out again. And then you might find people are surprised towards the end rather than with you. So there is I think if you give, early, like you say, the rough draft, that kind of stuff, as it's developing, people can see it. I think, it'll be a novel way of working. And we've had experience of being able to engage much wider groups than the usual suspects as a result of taking some of those approaches, particularly with our work on the SDG networks and so on. So, I mean, if you don't mind, I can flesh this out in a bit more detail on the board.
Sounds good. So I think Frank's kind of proposal for the first meeting probably sounds like a goer. We probably need to identify who we want to be on there. There may be some third sector organisations who are already engaging in some thinking around this for long-term planning, etc. And some externals would be good. I think in the meantime, it'd be good to get something up and running to just reach out to as many people as possible as well, looking at what we can do through there. I was thinking about the young persons panel. I don't know how many people are on that, but we have a potential to either invite 2 or 3 of them to meet 16 of us, or there's 40 of us in a room, which just ends up being a riot. And I wonder if I was going to say, I wonder if we just do a small delegation of us, 4 people, meet with them and can report back to the group and just do it and have an hour and a half for them if they're...
I think the problem with the young people is that obviously, school, stuff like that, it's hard for them to engage in from different areas. Yeah. So...
I think we should reach out to them and see how they... Okay. I mean, they must have some forum of...
I'll have a chat with
a WhatsApp group or something like that. I'll add on to
Snapchat. I can ask them on your behalf and see what help.
Yeah, and I think it would be... I just think if we say, if we were to say, we'll come along to one of your meetings, it ends up like a mini conference almost. Yes. And it'd be like one of those crazy Russian American conferences where there's 3 rows of people to decide who sits where and all that sort of stuff. And then maybe that we just, because I think we will probably get more out of meeting them than they would have getting out of meeting us. So a small delegation of 2 or 3 people could go and meet them, hear from them and bring it back is probably better use of everyone's time. But I think it's something we should look at doing. Yeah, no worries, cool.
Speaking of young blood,
thank you very much for coming.
Actually, that's what I think about the future of this.
So I think in terms of the first meeting, I think what would be helpful, I feel like I've got a retainer with Basecamp here, I might have mentioned it, but I think if there's organisations or a person or somebody that you've seen doing some thinking, or somebody that we want to speak on X topic, I think if we can just fire some stuff up on Basecamp, and then we can either do some research to see who we want to engage with, or approach sort of Fraser Van. I mean, once people, I don't know what they do now, but they used to be really good on local government stuff. Was I can't remember what it stands for, about CLES down, the guys from Manchester. They do a lot of stuff for local government. They spoke at the gathering when I was at SEO. I'll find out his name. But they were really good around like future planning of the local government landscape. We could be really brave and go to Coslow and see what they say, but I doubt we'll get another. It's not live, it's fine. Hi, if you're listening. So I think if we just fire it all into Basecamp, we can probably put together. I think we're probably looking at maybe 5 or 6 people come along, engage in that conversation
So
with us.
are we wanting to run it like, as we were talking before, like the Hollywood Committee in terms of you'd have like a panel of 3 and a panel of 3 and then each sort of thing, or you know?
I think we were going to do it more as a kind of round. I think I was kind of thinking about more round table rather than.
So well, they've got egg-shaped tables.
Yeah. So I think if we could get maybe 6 or so people that we can come in and we can fire questions out to them and engage with them.
Yeah.
In terms of the openness, what do we want to do in that? Do we want to, because we always put all the policy forum events on the website anyway, do we want to add, just for everyone here interested, or do we want to add something like, if you'd be interested in giving evidence of the session, email the address, or do we want to put something on the Basecamp to the wider policy intelligence circular, or are we going to address that at meetings, or are we just going to address that separately through the surveys and stuff? Or I just wonder, so what we just talked about invited guests, are we just going to be picking and choosing ourselves, or are we going to allow people to express interest?
Do me question kind of also in terms of what you're saying about how you're able to engage beyond kind of the usual suspects, and that's great. If we're talking about something more than just kind of online engagement, that immediately takes up resource potentially of yourselves, certainly of us, and that's obviously what we're partly here for. But to do that meaningfully, obviously very quickly becomes very significant. But obviously that's also the way that we're going to engage with the mass of the very small, locally based charities, and how we sort of manage that in a meaningful way. What is the capacity to support that? What's the appetite?
Well, there is a resource question, of course. I think anything for something of this kind of nature, producing a manifesto, I think you can expect that SCBO reasonably resources as a serious proposition. But obviously, you got to it might well want to get somebody like from one of the institutes who's going to charge a fee and stuff like that. You might think that's a good, really, really important way of getting some intelligence in, but just be aware that then reduces budget.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of as valuable as that, and certainly in terms of the kind of the high level insight. How do we attract from the outset the practitioner level input? Is that something that's feasible, and when do we want to do that?
That's a good question.
Silence. I think there's a few. So I think what would be good to take away. So obviously I've got to catch up with Bashir and Shelley about the kind of wider engagement, ongoing engagement through this project. I think there's probably an effort to put together a short plan between now and December where we can, so we know when we've got evidence sessions, but there's probably little bits that could be happening in between. So whether that's an online consultation or whether it's grabbing some time at another forum that SCVO operates that we may want to speak to, and how do we use what opportunities already exist that we don't need to create, because there may be some stuff that's already out there that we don't need to create. And then I think feeding that back through just to kind of see where people are saying, where people sense where the best way forward is, and that does that sound agreeable at the minute? I mean, I don't expect by the end of today for us to have a complete project plan from start to finish, and we just follow it, and there's no divergence. But I think that some of the questions are worth kind of taking some time to stew over. I mean, I'm away to Lanzarote next week, so I won't be stewing over that.
Can I ask a question from an SCBO perspective?
Yep.
Are you going to be thinking about splitting into subgroups and things, because that obviously has a resource implication as well?
Valid question. Is it? I mean, I think. I don't know what do people think.
Straight away, you've got a small group of people.
Yeah.
But again, I'd see that as a parliamentary committee, how they go out and do engagement.
Yeah.
And that sort of way, and I wouldn't necessarily say that's subgroup, and I wouldn't necessarily see there being resource implication for SCBO and that. Be up for the, well, maybe apart from maybe arranging it, but it'd be up to the. So there's 3 people going to meet, young people, it'd be up to them to kind of write up the outcome of that and share it with the other members. In this sense, you have things. And maybe when you came to the writing part of it.
Yeah, I think maybe I think that once you come to pull the final thing together, it maybe makes sense to have a few people looking at a specific topic. But I think in the evidence gathering, I think we may start to create an industry of meetings that we don't really need to be doing if we just split off, and there's a risk that we all then become somewhat isolated in terms of.
Also, it's not. I'm not raising the question as a resource issue necessarily for SCBO. It's also a resource issue for you.
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
Because you're all volunteering your time into this.
Yeah.
And you need to think about how much time you can afford to give into this. As I said, I think we would reasonably support anything that gets you to the outcome that we're looking for here. I think that's. So I don't sound as though we want to put any barriers. We don't. And the other way around.
Yeah.
But it's just from your own perspective, like how much time.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're acutely aware of in terms of everyone around the table has got a day job and life outside their day job, and this is an additional commitment. So I think, I just think there's something. I think there's a risk that if we split off into specific areas, we start to become a bit disjointed in terms of, especially in something like the manifesto, that there's, I think Andrew's way of putting it is quite good, that there's various steps that need to be taken to present that bigger vision, and if you might lose that if we all split away. And I think there are things like Basecamp or email or whatever exists too, where people can just be firing an idea in or firing points in, and it's not a case of 3 people need to meet in Glasgow for a coffee or whatever. Because I think reducing that burden would be desirable by all, I'd imagine.
In terms of the evidence session, in order to get the maximum benefit from the time, it would be helpful for people that we invite to come along to be invited to provide a little written thing.
Yeah, I was wondering that if we want to propose kind of 3 or 4 questions to them beforehand, even if it's a 2-page brief, and I might provide some of that content that you were talking about earlier. If we can, kind of say to them, you've done an economic analysis of over the next 10 years. What's the top level stuff that we should know? Boom, 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 boom.
Rather than, because then we get that, we can go straight into questions rather than first half an hour is then presenting something that we could have had.
It also means evidence will get to people's needs that they're consistent and that they're all working off the same plate rather than someone ramping on for this for one like that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think, again, we don't want it to be maybe as onerous as what some parliamentary committees ask, but if it's a kind of top level 3 questions that were, or 3 themes that we're looking at, and then we could then kind of say to them where, you know, interesting you said this can expand on it, that sort of thing. So I think the first meeting, the 24th, looking at that kind of future landscape, demographics, economics.
In terms of identifying people to present evidence, that obviously I'm assuming we have to have like a deadline in terms of suggestions. If we're going to be contacting key people, they're going to need their own amongst notes.
Yeah.
So obviously that then limits the time we then have to identify who they are and then get the invitations out and then take the space of time to get them to reply to the invitations and then for us to find a substitute if they then say no, I'm busy or no, I can't, I don't want to go away. So
I think in terms of us kind of firing out ideas, kind of the end of next week, reasonable. That's the end of February, isn't it?
Right, this is first month.
Yeah, and just, I mean, we may not know who the person is or who the organisation is, but if we can say it would be useful to have someone to come and speak to us about X, you know, I might write X and Andrew might name the organisation. You know, I think if we can just all throw it out there, and get us thinking. I mean, there must be people that will all know some various organisations if that's okay, and then, you know, we can lean on internal knowledge within SCVO of other organisations that are out there doing stuff like this.
Well, the advantage is if you work openly, which you are planning to do, you will find people who none of us will have thought about. Were valuable for the thing. So and the other thing is, like, for example, like the parliamentary committees, I think we will need to publish all the input you get from people. And like the parliamentary committees, if people feel that's going to compromise their sensitivities, we can anonymise who they are. But the actual evidence will need to be published, and we'll need to make that clear to whoever we're inviting.
That's sometime with that. Perfect. And then if Rashir wants to think about the young person's panel, we can work out how we engage with that. And then we can think about how we set that system up for open kind of engagement, ongoing engagement.
I think the only thing I was just going to say is we have at SCVO, we have bought webinar technology, which we did an event with the UN Special Rapporteur last week, so it works quite well. So that's another channel that's available for us to use. That's actually quite resource efficient as well as being able to engage people who are not necessarily central belt or very close by. Right. So that's another thing.
Yeah, I do think that would be. I think that when you mentioned about open dialogue, the webinar came up. I didn't know how that was set up, but if SCVO's got the capacity, there's no reason why we can't have 2 or 3 members of the forum doing a webinar on a topic, and that certainly allows us to reach much further than the central belt and usual suspects. Cool.
So do we want 2 to 3 members of the forum to do a webinar on each topic as relates to the evidence session? So you want me to get 3 webinars scheduled in now?
And should we do them before the overall evidence session, or the main evidence session, or after? We can think about that. But I think it makes sense to do a webinar alongside each evidence session.
We might as well get the dates in so people can decide who wants to go.
And if that's basically 9 people would need to put their name forward at some point.
Our webinar is 1 hour.
Yeah.
So, and you can do it.
Like, we don't need to be in Mansfield Square. We can just come
Anywhere.
The special rapporteur is in New York.
Well, I guess that. So yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'd just be lazy. Like I'm downhill to Mansfield Square. Right, that's fine. Cool. So I think there's a few questions we just need to bottom out, and we can come back to everyone. But I think we've got a plan for the first session.
Sorry, just on the webinar point. Just be aware that when you're thinking about people who could contribute, that opens up the possibilities for getting people internationally as well. So if you're thinking of somebody who's got experience with developing civil society in another part of the world, which you want to learn from, there's an opportunity to do that as well.
Sounds good. Perfect. Cool. So for the last 10 minutes, we've got updates. We've got 5 minutes from SCVO. You got anything?
It's just because we always have that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we did say it would be a kind of standard item that we've just flipped to kind
Oh,
of.
it's me, I thought it was Gia.
No, it's you.
Myself on it.
We've just flipped to kind of
I guess so.
time that we'd put in rather than 5 minutes for you guys. And
You gave the update to Dimitri's.
Oh yeah, so we had the intermediaries that was a week and a half ago. We had really good attendance and there was a lot of action points from that. They are interested in having a manifesto meeting of their own where they can share. It'll be different from this because it'll be about sharing the themes of the different intermediaries, but it would be useful if someone from the forum did want to come along because it would be an opportunity to hear from lots of intermediaries about what they're thinking for their own personal manifestos and where there is overlap. So
that's what I kind of think. That's what I was meaning in terms of opportunities that already exist. Because I think it would make sense for us, well, at least somebody to be in the room. I don't. Nobody goes to it from their organisation though.
I do.
Do you go?
Yeah, and we certainly wouldn't be doing a manifesto for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
That wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so it might make sense for Greg to report back on this.
Do you know when the next meeting is?
yeah, I'll get them pictures of it.
Just while Shelley's doing that, also just to highlight that in terms of what SCBO is doing for its, particularly with our core grant agreement with the Scottish Government over the next 18 months, that is all available on our website in an interactive format. So you can go and search it and find out. We spoke about this before.
Yeah.
But you know, as you go through the project, you might be wondering, is SCBO actually working on something that I'm interested in here already? Then you can have a look at that. Sounds good.
It's Thursday the 2nd of May, and it's in the morning. Well, it's usually in the morning, and then it's 10 o'clock. So as usual. It's in Edinburgh.
And just also one other thing to say in terms of the context, that you're all part of the Basecamp Policy Forum, but you're also, by being a member of that, you're also part of the network of networks that we have, which is the called the Policy Intelligence Circular.
Circular.
Yeah.
Circular.
The Policy Intelligence Circular.
So I didn't add all the new members to the Policy Intelligence Circular yet, only because we hadn't met yet, and I didn't want to create loads of confusion when different stuff came through that wasn't related to the policy forum. So I thought I'll wait till the meeting, then you've all had your agendas and everything, and then I'll add you, so you know that there's a distinction between if it comes from the Policy Intelligence Circular, that's different and optional. If it comes from the policy forum, probably you definitely don't want to miss that and take part in that.
And I'm glad you did that into steps. I think the important thing to remember is the policy forum is like a closed community for the forum. So if you reply all to that, it'll only go to the policy forum. If it says Policy Intelligence Circular on it,
You'll get a lot of angry emails.
We have 280 people on the Policy Intelligence Circular right now. It also includes Scottish Government people as well, just so you're aware. But it's a very good, powerful way of communicating with the wider sector as well. And just alongside that, we've also got a Sustainable Development Goals network of around 250 people as well. So in terms of reach, interactive reach, there's quite a bit there. But you know, don't think too much about it right now. I just want you to be aware that if you get something as a Policy Intelligence Circular Basecamp, that is a much bigger group. And yeah, if you were wanting to moan about SCBO, then don't go for that.
Do it on the forum.
Also on the Basecamp, I've only put 3 posts up so far, and one of them is about like guidelines on Basecamp and how to manage the information you receive. So you might want to have a look and set your preferences before you get added to the Policy Intelligence Circular, because you can like say, right, I want to get my updates from Basecamp or every day of the week at lunchtime, or I only want to get updates on a Friday, or you set up however you want, because otherwise you'll get everything as it comes through, but not everybody wants that. They want like more of a digest that they can go through.
Did you mention boosts as well?
Yeah, you can like stuff. There's lots of little icons you can do with that.
So yeah, the boost thing's important because if you want to just kind of say yes, I agree, or this is brilliant, whatever. Don't reply, because that'll go to everybody's inbox. Just click the boost button and type that in there. That will only go to the person that posted it. So it's a way of avoiding. Yeah. So that's the way to do it. So if you use boosts, then you can, then somebody can see that you've actually replied, but they don't get an email.
Anything else? Can I just bring up a point that might be very forward, not very forward-thinking, but a little bit far advanced. So when the invites come out, we've got an away day scheduled in for September. I'm on leave, but that's fine. I was wondering if we wanted to use, so the kind of purpose of the away day that we had put forward was to help us plan for next year's project, think about what issues we might want to do. But I was wondering if we might want to split it as a bit of a writing day / future thinking, because then it means we'll all be in one space. We could then split up into small groups and take chunks of it to write and then share it around, and we're all in the room, rather than us all doing it virtually and then chucking it into something like that. So it might be a way to structure that away day a bit. Like
The Smith Commission thing.
Yeah, like the one with when the Smith Commission was going through, it was quite handy to have 12 people in a room and splitting up into 4 groups and coming back and then going into different groups and things like that.
And locked in until they came up with it.
Well, literally, yeah. I mean, it was yeah. It was monkeys and Microsoft tabs or whatever they were called at the time. But yeah, I just wonder if that might be a good use of that day if we're using it to start the writing of it proper, if you would, and then spend some time thinking about what the next kind of piece of work would be. But we can work that as we're closer to it. I don't know if you want to think about moving it. I mean, I'm on pretty much the whole September. It's a bit of a nightmare, but
I think the only thing was, I think that away day, I think everyone was coming, like Anna,
yeah.
all that, but it's quite early, so I probably could get another.
I mean, I can't really write. I'm from Fife, so it's probably no point me being there.
Because just now it's on the 24th of September, and the meeting after that is on.
We can have a look at and see what we're going to do.
Just so the meetings aren't
Yeah.
the 6th of November, so we could move it to October, but then there would be a meeting October, November, and December.
No. No, let's work out what we're going to do. We can see.
Or we can move to August. Yeah. I just like.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look at it and we'll see what we can do.
But there's no objections to August in general. Late August.
I think I'm off the last 3 weeks of September, so the first week's free. If we just want to move it to the first week of September, if that was easy.
Okay, I'll see if I can do
I mean,
that.
if I have to be there, I mean, I don't need to be there. But... Cool. Anything else?
Just a question. The next meeting's at 10 o'clock start. Does it have to be 10? You'd be slightly later. Just school run.
Well, we can change if we want. So traditionally, like the meetings of when we used to be the policy committee, the meetings they started at 10, but that was like usually tea and coffee or whatever, and then they formally start at 10:30. And then I think we agreed last year that the meetings would all be 2.5 hours. So this is like a shorter meeting with the gathering. That was so that there was a preference that people wanted to finish at lunchtime so that they could go back to their jobs, and they didn't want to take a whole day out, but that's up for discussion, and I could move the time into the meetings.
I mean,
that's what people want me to do.
Could we move it to the afternoon, or is that just as much of a pain as?
But then does that work better? It is better, because then some people might have the opposite.
Yeah, it's usually because it drops them to school.
Yeah.
Or I mean, because I think the idea of the evidence session was that the first hour would be evidence, the second hour would be time for us to stew over it and digest it. So does 11 till 1 work? Because then you're inviting externals 11 till 12, and then 12 till 1, and then we can all shoot off.
Takes up most of the time.
If you're coming through, yeah.
time you get back to work curiosity, talk
Yeah.
half to 3 o'clock, what you going to do after 2 hours, I'll walk through things, we'll just
We're just going to have the meetings at the BHF office, so I'll be at the desk in 5 minutes. Well, let's have a look at the timings and nail them down.
Well, probably it would be easier because everyone's here now. If we make, probably people aren't here, but if we make a decision now, because otherwise we might go away and make a decision and then
Yeah.
it doesn't suit. So it would be better if we could just.
Well, I'm easy, so
What time would the others should be there?
Something like